Howdy, and welcome to Early Reflections, the podcast where young folks talk about making it in the sonic arts. I'm your host, Adam Daniel Jones, and my guest today is my friend, Jemina Brechoire. I'm recording this after the interview because there was a little bit of audio issues and some file transferring stuff that came up. My apologies in advance about that. I wanted to have this conversation because it was just such a great chat. So here is that. I'll talk a bit more about why the audio sounds different at the break. Enjoy the interview. Jemina, how you doing?
I'm doing great. So happy to be here. I told you, like, when I heard you were doing a podcast, I was just really excited. It's nice to see people channeling creativity through those times. And
absolutely, I'm so glad you could be on here. So real quick, Jemina, before we get into it, what are some pronouns that I can use to address you as? She, her, hers. Perfect. Alrighty. So for our audience, Jemina is a pianist, a composer, a singer, a songwriter, a producer, an arranger. So what did I miss in that description? What else would you describe yourself as?
Good. I think this was accurate.
Good. But yeah, also real quick before we get into it, I'm realizing that this is unintentionally the fourth episode of this podcast, and all of my previous guests have had the letter J at the beginning of their name. So I appreciate having you on and just continuing that tradition, I guess, you know. So talk to me a little bit about your sort of musical upbringing and in your childhood, and how much music was sort of a part of your childhood, and then maybe through to your adolescence, and what kind of drove you to pursue music as a career.
Yeah, I think my parents are people that love music, and many different kinds of music, so I grew up being surrounded by classical music or jazz, Errol Garner, Chet Baker are some of my early memories. So many different aesthetic, Pink Floyd, I don't know, there's so many. And I always knew that I wanted to do something with that knowledge, with music. And from there, I got the opportunity to go to a kind of a peculiar secondary school, since it involved a music option, So from the age of 10 to 14, I had regular like secondary school classes, as well as 5 hours of music per week. Which, like, I'm very lucky that I lived this experience, and it definitely comforted me in the idea that that's what I wanted to do with my life, And from there, after high school, I moved to Paris to pursue studies in jazz music, like in both a private school and a conservatory. And then I got the chance to come here, study at Berkeley with a presidential scholarship, which I'm still to this day very grateful for. So yeah, that's been, my way. And coming at Berkeley, I was just surrounded by so many different genres, Middle Eastern music, Indian music, anything. I mean, this environment is like really diverse, and there's people from everywhere across the world, which like also nourished my music quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Berkeley is such an interesting and really good place for that, is because, especially like speaking as an American, almost all of my good friends, like especially the first few years, and with you and everything, and in my later years too, all of my good friends were international students, and like it's just such a good, like, very diverse place to like get any kind of influence you could think of. So it's just a really incredible place, and I think that we're all really lucky to have been there.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's really refreshing, for lack of a better word, to see this music finally being studied and digged deeper into, I do feel like, a lot of conservatories or music school, it's like either you study classical music or jazz, and there's just so much more out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for our listeners, you are from France. I think we had talked about that earlier. You had moved to Paris to do more studies, specifically about music and everything. So where were you originally born? What like city, town?
I was born in Dijon.
Dijon.
You have great mustards there, apparently. Yeah, and I moved quite a lot actually. As I mentioned, like I went to this secondary school with a jazz option, um, which was in southern France, and then moved to Paris for further studies.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think I've told you about this before, but my sister did a study abroad program in France, and her host family was from Dijon. So she spent a whole summer. She spent 3 months there, and they just were such a welcoming family. Shout out to the Mercier family, to Samuel and Emmanuel. So gotta shout them out a little bit. So moving on a little bit. So what was the transition like coming from France to the U.S. and then specifically to Berkeley? Like we had sort of touched on it a little bit. If you would go into it a little bit more, did you find that like that it was a hard place to sort of adjust to, or was it a pretty good, pretty quick adjustment?
No, to me it was a very quick adjustment, and it's like this place has been waiting for me. It's, I don't know, it's a way of describing it. Yeah, I just felt home, and surrounded by people that were vibrating at the same frequency as I am, and just being moved by the same things and passionate about the same things that I am. So it's like, finding a second family. And also have to say, I love Boston. I absolutely love this place. And the States. I mean, I haven't been everywhere, I've been to New York, I've been to Colorado, Rhode Island, a couple other places, but it feels home. So
Right before I left Boston, we would always joke around about that. You would be like, "What's up, fellow American?" And I would be like, "Hello, fellow Americans." So it was really fun. Howdy, yeah, exactly. That's my intro to this show. I had to make it the most American thing I could think of, So
I love that. When I was in Colorado,
really?
everyone would say howdy all the time. Yeah, and I loved it.
yeah. Funny. We always kind of think of howdy as like a very southern thing, but that's cool that they do it in Colorado. It's good that it's getting universal. It's everybody's using it. Yeah. So moving on a tiny bit, would you mind telling our listeners sort of how we met, like the impetus for our meeting?
Yeah, so we took this philosophy
aesthetics,
class, aesthetic, right? Yeah, aesthetics, with Fyodor Skiros, amazing teacher, and we just had so many great conversations in that class, and I felt like we all got to think deeper about the meaning behind what we do. What else can I say? Yeah, we met there.
I was trying to remember what the book is. So for the listeners, Tedros Kiros is a really, really interesting man. He's from Ethiopia. He is just really, really incredible philosophic mind. He made us buy his own book as a textbook for this course, which was very interesting. I had never had a teacher that had done that before. So I was like, oh, cool. We're buying your own textbook for this course. And I think we like paid him. So it was just funny. I had never run across that. So, and then sort of after that, I had realized that we had so many mutual friends. Like you knew Mitchell Schomburg, who I've known for, coming up on 10 years now. Me and him are from Portland. We went to the same middle school. We went to the same high school. We were in bands there together. So, and he sort of came to Berkeley after going to school in Canada for a little bit. But it was just funny. You really, really see, especially in my experience, you really see how small of a world it is.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's so funny, man. I was reflecting on that. I feel like all of my best friends are either from Portland or Colorado, somehow. It's just a funny pattern. But I mean, I do feel like when people are sort of like driven by the same energy, like your life ways is sort of aligning,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm not surprised that you and Mitchell crossed paths again, you know.
Right. Yeah. It's so funny because I never really, until I was older, I sort of started to play music when I was, 10 or so. And I was sort of into a scene in Portland that seemed like it was all encompassing of the city. I've talked about this a little bit before in the podcast, but it's sort of everything is very homegrown, I feel like, in the Portland music scene. Like, other than, outside bands that come in from touring, it's very, very inclusive. And even though there's so many different genres around, there's really interesting hip hop scene, there's a really interesting like hardcore, punk scene, there's, folk scenes, but all of those kind of bands would all play at a lot of the same venues sort of in the time that I was there. So it was really interesting, and also really similar to like the Boston, like sort of Allston house show scene. As I don't know if you're as versed to that, but yeah, it's really funny.
I lived in Allston. Yeah, I've never been to Portland, but what you're describing to me sounds pretty similar to Berlin.
Oh, interesting.
Like just this place where musicians and creator meet and create all sorts of music. Although, if I'm not wrong, I think in Berlin it's predominantly electronic, right? I mean, there's a huge electronic scene, but not only. And yeah, that makes me really want to come to Portland. I think I would really like the aesthetic of the city and seeing a place where there's so much space for creation.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so cool. I'm living up just outside of Seattle right now, but it's very similar to Seattle. Seattle's a bit bigger than Portland, but I feel like there's still a lot of like inclusivity in those scenes. I'm not as deeply connected up here, but it really, like, there's a similar sort of undercurrent of lots of different kinds of genres and everything all sort of congregating in the same venues and everything. So it's a both are really interesting, cool cities. And that's not even touching on sort of the you probably got this with having spent some time in Colorado, but that's not even touching on sort of the like beautiful like serenity of the nature that's so close. You don't have to travel that far outside of either Portland or Seattle to get like to interesting, like, high desert to the mountains to the beach, that kind of thing. So we're very lucky out here.
Yeah, I wrote a lot. I composed a lot in my time in Colorado, during my time in Colorado. Nature really inspires you, like there's something happening, I don't know, resonating with the cells of your body and translating to you writing or creating in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
I did have a question. Is it okay for me to ask a question?
Of course.
To like a conversation.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the sound design scene? Like I'm really curious about that,
Yeah.
because you are in that field very much, and I'm wondering, is there like special places, sort of like poles, around the States?
Yeah, so sound design is interesting. It's definitely an industry that I'm still breaking into. I have some connections, but especially during a pandemic, it's been kind of hard to get into that and find like consistent work. But yeah, it's sort of interesting, especially for like video game sound design and getting into the world of like interactive media, that kind of stuff. It's pretty much Seattle and Los Angeles, because there's lots of really specific like game studios and stuff. Like up in Seattle, there's Bungie, who were the original makers of like all the Halo games and everything. And there's like a lot of other small sort of independent game studios around too. And then Los Angeles is where like really huge game studios, like where like Activision has a lot of different offices in different parts of California. And yeah, it's just interesting. Like there's sort of, again, there are sort of like poles of sound design and everything, like you were kind of saying. There's a couple in Texas too. Like there's a few game studios in Texas, and yeah. Oh, actually, another big one is Montreal. Montreal's huge for video games.
Oh, I love Montreal. Yeah. And yeah, Los Angeles, actually, that makes sense, because it's where like the film scoring industry is based as well.
Exactly. We do, yeah. Sound designers and film scores are really like it's the two like separate like sonic like disciplines that always are, converging and are always like crossing paths like stylistically and, like personally, like it's always a lot of people running the same circles, so it's really interesting. So yeah, moving on a bit. So you're sort of the first person I've had on the show that is really well versed in sort of arranging, so like being an arranger. For those who don't know, would you mind describing like sort of the role of an arranger or like an orchestrator in like a piece of music?
I would say it's almost like taking a piece of music, and yeah, and there's a part of interpretation, but you also kind of have to respect the essence of the original piece. Um, I would say it's kind of like reading a monologue and making it your own.
Yeah.
You know, like different interprets are gonna give you so many different takes on, let's say, a Shakespeare monologue. So yeah, you have this piece of music, and you can choose a certain instrumentation, certain sounds, and it's gonna make it your own in a way.
Yeah, that's how I feel like my understanding of arranging and orchestration is, especially like sort of how I saw a lot of people doing it at Berkeley, is like sort of you said, there's this element of respecting the original version, and sort of adding new flair, like artistic flair and whatever. I'll touch on it a tiny bit. We're gonna look into a couple of your other songs from your album a little bit later in the second half of the show. But for example, you have an arrangement of Spain by Chick Corea that's on your album. So it's just interesting, like your touches to it. I'll have it linked in the description of this episode, but your touches to it are something that I would have never thought to come to something like that. I've heard lots of different versions of Spain by Chick Corea, but having there be really interesting like distorted guitars in it, and lots of really intricate stuff like that is just something that's so like refreshing to hear in that kind of song.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, I think it's all a matter of what your assignment is at the end of the day. Like, if you have to arrange this piece of music for a choir, but you have to stay like very true to it, very close to the original, like you're obviously not gonna, bring a metal band at the middle of it. I mean, you do whatever you want, of course, but like if this was my own project, this arrangement of Spain, I mean, this was my album, so I kind of had the freedom to do more, and at the end of the day, like it's an arrangement of Spain, but I would say that half of it is like, not, you know what I mean, it's not even, you don't hear the melody anymore, and I just went in a total different direction. But I was arranging this string quartet for a concert at the BPC a couple months ago, and for this one I kind of had to stay closer to the original theme.
Yeah, definitely. So sort of to dovetail off of that, so in your own music, do you find that sort of the songwriting and production and arranging processes are all inherently linked, or do you try to sort of separate them all from each other?
No, to me they're all quite linked. And there's something about working alone, I mean, like writing and producing and arranging by yourself, that you have the freedom to just throw any ideas randomly and then take them back and twist them around. So I would just have like those drums sound in my head, and I would kind of lay there and later on add a melody or strings on top of it and start producing while writing at the same time, so yeah, it was definitely it was all linked. I didn't even like separate one process from the other. It was kind of like one big process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I would imagine must be just so freeing about being able to do that with something like with your own music, like is having those processes all sort of flow into each other. Whereas, do you feel the same when it's another thing that you're working on like outside of your own music? Like if it's a commission from somebody or if it's like a project for somebody else, do you feel like they're all sort of connected as well when you're working with somebody else, or is there a little bit less room for for creativity? Not necessarily, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but I see what you mean.
Hmm.
Well, again, it depends on what the nature of the assignment is. Like right now, I'm working on this project where I'm the musical director of this ensemble,
Mm.
and so I'm arranging the songs, already existing songs by Esperanza Spalding, actually.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and then later on producing the whole thing. But I do have to think outside of just what I want to do creatively, like I really have to respect the form of songs and their original aesthetic. I can't just, um, throw random ideas over there, because the project, like I think one goal of it is to really understand her music and get something from it.
Yeah.
So I force myself to stay really true to the form of the songs. I listen a lot to the live performances and the album recordings, and I transcribe everything.
Yeah.
And then so I like, obviously the ensemble is different from the orchestration on the album or the orchestration during the um, live sets. So I kind of have to like assign different parts to other players or find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And once I'm done with that, once I have the form of the song and each part is laid there, I take a little more liberties. I would be like, oh, this kind of would be nice to have a metal section here.
Yeah.
I seem to love metal sections somehow.
Mm.
Or, I would create an introduction. But I'm also trying to, yeah, really stay authentic to the essence of the song and not go too far into the creative process.
Right, absolutely. Like I sort of feel like there's an interesting there's an interesting sort of dichotomy in especially jazz music where there are arrangements of especially stuff like we're coming up on that time of year, holiday music, where there are some just incredibly bebop, just really wild chord progressions, and then you'll they'll sneak in have yourself a merry little Christmas on top of it. It's really funny. There's sort of dichotomy between those and really methodical sort of not necessarily recreations, but reinterpretations of the original. And I feel like that must be a hard line to sort of straddle.
Yeah, how to balance creativity with like just doing the job that was assigned to you, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, man, it's tough sometimes. Like you have to remind yourself that you're at the service of the music, like a music that is already here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome. So, we'll get a little nerdy now. Feel free to get in as deep as how you want with technical musical terms. I'm excited for the listeners to hear this. So, what would your secrets behind an awesome like arrangement? Horn arrangement, string arrangement, a really really interesting arrangement.
Ooh, so you said the word interesting, so I'm gonna get around that.
Sure.
You can sort of like study the masters and kind of like copy their writing techniques.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, if you want to arrange strings, you probably want to listen to Max Richter, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, and analyze what they do, and they have like really specific techniques that you might want to reproduce. But if you want to make your arrangement interesting, maybe you kind of want to like add a little signature, like
Yeah.
like something that's original and where the listener is kind of like, oh yeah, the sound of it is really specific, you know.
Yeah.
So what I've been trying to do is, at the end of the day, just listen to many different things. You know, if I'm arranging a string quartet, I'm gonna listen to string quartets, but I'm also gonna listen to a Taylor Swift song. You know,
Yeah.
like I'm gonna try to get ideas from everywhere that I can, and I'm gonna hear a guitar on whatever random song it is and be like, ooh, I kind of like this little lick. How can I transcribe it to my string quartet? Maybe the cello can play pizzicato.
Mhm.
You know, maybe the violin can be in a range that's sort of like uncomfortable but still possible. You know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but to me, the recipe of an interesting arrangement is to dig deeper into the possibilities of instruments,
Yeah.
and yeah, just try to be original and authentic, and try to give it a sound and an identity.
Yeah.
You know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of the thing, the first thing that comes to mind. Like you said, stretching sort of the possibilities of instruments, and having there be not necessarily conventional sounds in whatever those are. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the context of your music, but sort of the first thing that comes to mind with me would be something like the Rite of Spring. Is opening on a really high bassoon, I believe, line.
Yeah.
Yes. Very high for the range of a bassoon.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I just remember looking at that in my conducting class at Berkeley, which is an interesting thing that I didn't really know that not every college had that. I didn't realize that not everybody was needing to take conducting classes. So again, that's something that I've heard that is fairly unique to Berkeley and is really interesting. But yeah, I remember taking a look at those scores and just being like, oh my God, this is wild. It looks like there's some stuff, especially in the Stravinsky music, that just looks like, not nonsensical patterns or whatever. It almost doesn't look like music to me. It's so beyond that. It just is such incredible things just to look at, not even to hear.
I mean, can you imagine that people were fighting in the audience, like screaming, like, stop that, like,
Yeah.
it's a shame.
Paris, yeah, exactly. Another tie back to your homeland. The riots or whatever. I forget what year that was. Was it like 1913 or something? We had to learn about it in a history class, but it was sometime in history. Yeah, when music that didn't resonate with you was it was grounds to start a riot over.
Yeah, but I guess at the end of the day, it's like maybe the goal. I mean, I don't want to assume what Stravinsky goal was. But I do believe that every artist wants to create a reaction, for the viewer or the listener. And I think that was quite well done.
Yeah.
Like whether the audience liked it or not, like it's like emotions were expressed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue. So we're going to take a short break here on the podcast, but coming up, we're going to delve into and sort of analyze some of your music more in depth. But first, I'm going to throw to a meditation minute. Howdy, and welcome to the 4th edition of Meditation Minute. Before we get started, I'm very excited. You can probably tell there's a bit of a difference in audio quality and fidelity. This is pretty much my unboxing of a brand new microphone. I just got a Lewitt LCT 440 microphone. It's really great, especially for the price. It's really doesn't break the bank, and I am just from listening to this, it's really a great purchase. Also, before we start, I just created an email for this podcast where you, my darling, dearest listeners, can send in questions that you'd want me to ask our guests on air. any other guests you think that should be on air. If you want to be on this podcast, feel free to reach out and drop me a line there. The address is earlyreflectionspod@gmail.com. Again, that's earlyreflectionspod@gmail.com. The meditation minute I have for you guys this week was recorded in Poulsbo, Washington, pretty close to where I live. Tiny bit of a drive, not too far though, because I didn't want to necessarily risk, exposure to a ton of people, that kind of thing. But this one was recorded at Kitsap Memorial State Park. It's an absolutely gorgeous park. It's right on the Hood Canal, which is sort of this big, body of water that separates the Olympic Peninsula from the rest of the Kitsap Peninsula. And it's just absolutely gorgeous. I had incredible views of the sort of snow-kissed mountains. It was really, really great. I recorded this one with a pair of my Clippy EM172 mics, really small mics. I think I talked about them last week or the week before. They're just great. This was recorded sort of on a walkway that was elevated above a beach area, which was awesome. Sometimes the issue with recording directly on the beach can be that if your mics aren't properly in phase with each other, it can introduce some weird phasing artifacts afterwards. But yeah, just imagine the beautiful mountains sort of shimmering, reflecting across the canal, and feel the cold air, blowing through your hair, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, mostly just relax, close your eyes, and enjoy. All right, and we're back. So we're going to look at two songs from your recent album, which is called 22. It was released when? When was it released?
22 of August. Awesome. That's great. Very cool.
Yeah.
What's the sort of meaning behind the name, real quick?
That was about, I was 22 when I did that album. I just turned 23. And thank you. And that album, I guess, was about, and I don't know if it was about, but it was that year of my life where I was 22, and I wrote music during that time, so I thought I might as well, use that number as a title. And also, I don't know, titles to me are just titles sometimes, I'm like, it needs a title,
right?
Whatever. It could have been named Prudential Frontier. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. I can't even remember how many projects I have on my computer that are just like random crap 1 or whatever, random crap 2. Naming is such a funny thing that way.
I would say number help.
Yeah, exactly. The numbers are a way to version track it.
So real quick, before we sort of get into specifics with the music, where do you find yourself the most inspired? Like, do you find it in a physical place, or do you sort of find it in a state of mind, or where really gets the creative energy going for you?
That is a very cool question. I'm gonna try to do it justice and not give you just a random answer. I just feel like I have this urge whenever I'm living things that matter to me to write, and I think I've been lucky enough that I've led a pretty inspired life, like I've met amazing people. I went to great places where I've grown a lot, and so I kind of like need to translate those experiences into something. So I write on a daily basis, like I write every day, even if it's just like I have a melody in mind or a chord progression, whatever. It's like this feeling at the end of the day or middle of the day, like the time doesn't really matter. That's, you need to release something inside of you. I don't know when that moment happens exactly. Like sometimes I would just take a walk to the commons and have that melody in mind and go back home and lay it on the keyboard. Or sometimes after I'm done with an assignment, this would be my composition time. It really, I don't think there's a specific pattern because every day is quite different when you're a musician, you know what I mean? Like you always are working on different projects. And
yeah, I love that. I love the concept that it's sort of always dormant, that inspiration, you have that urge. I think that's such an interesting thing that's so specific to like creative people, is that sort of that pushing factor to, have some sort of creative like inkling and have it sort of manifest into something that's, tangible, is such an interesting thing. Yeah, absolutely. Totally. So we're going to dive into two of your songs from your album. So the first one I'm going to start with is Budapest. So take me sort of through the writing process of that song. And I feel like there were probably some pretty specific influences there. Would you mind talking about those as well?
Definitely. So I think one of the main influences throughout the whole song is Middle Eastern music. Again, like that melody with a couple microtones and the rhythms behind, which is interesting because the title of the song is Budapest. So it's like I'm making Budapest Middle Eastern somehow. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the main influence, and I would say maybe around the ending, this part like da 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 da. I was pretty inspired by chants, and how in some like communities like the gypsy community or in flamenco like you have the predominance of the voice in some songs, and it would just be like 10 vocalists and hand claps, and it really is an instrument in itself. Like voice can be used as an instrument, right? So for the final section I was really inspired by that, and I would say chants, Middle Eastern music, a bit of jazz, definitely. With the use of we have Bastian Reiser on trumpet and Nick Bredel on saxophone, and both are doing crazy solos around the end, and so the jazz tradition with the improvisation, and it was also definitely predominant.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. So sort of this song, sort of like others that I know I've heard you play like in the past, whether it's at like a recital or a concert, it's just incredibly harmonically and melodically complex, and even like rhythmically complex. But sort of I feel like what's so unique about your music is that your vocal stylings make it so like inviting. Sort of the doubling that you do with a lot of the melodies is something that is just so pleasant to listen to. Like regardless of sort of how like melodically, complex it all is. So is that something that is intentional sort of on your part? Do you try to have that be like an undercurrent in your music?
I don't think it's intentional. I just feel like this writing comes from all the music that has nourished me, and that is like quite complex in some ways. Like I listen to a lot of music with odd time signatures, you know, like Tigran Hamaisan, for example. And so it kind of sinks into you, and at some point when you have absorbed it and listened to it and studied it for quite some times, it just becomes a natural part of your writing. Like you don't even think in terms of, oh yeah, I'm gonna have an odd time signature section here or whatever. It just like is within you, you know what I mean? So like I would have this pattern in my head or this melody that I would just lay down, and later on if I analyze it or hear people talking about it, like you saying like, oh yeah, it's really complex harmonically, or I'm like, oh yeah, I guess it is, but I didn't really think about it.
Yeah,
you know
it's
what
just
I mean?
sort of what comes naturally. Yeah,
exactly.
That's incredible.
Yeah. The music that I feel like it's so wildly incredible that's the music that comes naturally to you, is because it's so, you know, blaringly fast and really really interesting and really really incredibly like enriching to listen to. So I commend you, like, you know, a lot on that. So
yeah,
thanks.
Absolutely.
So the second song I would love to talk about, please correct me because I feel like I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but it's Tal Nor.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. So do you know what Tal Nor means, and sort of was this the meaning of this phrase or the word an influence behind what you composed?
Yeah, so we talked about titles, right? And how, like, my album is named 22, but it could have been named a lot of things. I found myself writing a lot around light, the idea of light, whatever that means, especially during those times, you know. And I have at least 3 or 4 songs where there's the word light in it.
Oh, wow.
So Tal Nor basically means here comes the light, or here is the light in Arabic.
Arabic, okay.
I wanted to, you know, I wrote my album during the quarantine time, and so Tal Nor, like here is the light, was kind of this idea of like goodness coming out of this situation.
Yeah, that's a beautiful sentiment. Like, yeah, I sort of feel like it's similar. Like it's sort of the way I would see it. And listening to this song, again, I encourage the listeners to take a listen to both of these songs. It really does give you the feeling of sort of like the light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing, and like seeing something light that's in the distance. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. That feels good to hear. That was what I was going for. The emotional component. Perfect. I wanted to dig into.
Sort of to go more personal, like, or not necessarily like deeply personal or anything, but what do you feel like some of your biggest struggles have been in your musical career, or like what hurdles that you've had to jump over? Like what would you say some of those were? And if you're still working on them, how are you, you know, approaching them? Or if you've passed them, like how did you work up to that, and how did you get over them?
You know, I think I have different answer for that question. One of them would be, I don't think I'm at that point in my life where I was really confronted with struggles in my career. Allow me to explain. I came to Berkeley with this scholarship, the presidential scholarship, which basically paid for my tuition, housing, food, like computer, amazing opportunity. So I feel like, the idea of coming to the United States for free and studying in this amazing school, I can't really say that I've had any difficulties in my career yet, you know. As I said, I'm moving to New York, and, you know, like amazing city, amazing music and also a lot of hardship. So I do feel like maybe the hardship are gonna come more around that corner, if that makes sense. But it's like, so far I think I can be nothing but grateful. So that's my first answer. My second answer is COVID. You know, obviously, like every musician right now. And at the same time, I did that album during the beginning of the pandemic, you know, and I recorded quite a lot and I wrote quite a lot. So I'm again trying to see the goodness in it. And yeah, I would say that so far I don't feel like I can really say that I've faced hardships in my career.
That's awesome.
You know?
And I continue to hope that you don't have to confront any massive hardships, because I know you're an incredible person, and I really wish that nothing horrible, you know, like should make its way to you. So yeah. And again, so moving on to the next thing, we sort of touched on it a little bit. But so yeah, the pandemic is something that's incredibly hard for people that are, you know, artists to be, you know, working through. So what does your artistic life, like day-to-day sort of life, look like now during the pandemic?
You know, it looks like staying home quite a lot. With like my little setup, my keyboard and my Logic sessions open. And so I have this project where I'm arranging those songs from Esperanza Spalding and being the musical director, so it's taking me quite a lot of time.
Yeah.
So on a daily basis, I say I would just work on it. Like, I mean, the arrangements are already done. Before I would spend time on writing this arrangement, but now collecting the audios from the musicians, producing the whole thing, making the videos, and when I'm done with that, which is kind of like the work I've been assigned, this is time for my own work, which is like writing, producing, arranging. Although, like I would say, my own work is more focused right now at this time on composing and producing. And when I'm done with that, you know, it kind of it's not the same every day. But let's say I'm done with a song, I would probably go to my friend's place to record some drums on it. I would kind of like reach out to people, to a great saxophonist, so that he can like record remotely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awesome. Yeah, you know, I feel like for me, I wasn't necessarily like I never really gigged that much during, you know, college and stuff. You know, I played in a few projects, but I wasn't necessarily a like gigging musician. Do you feel like there has been, you know, obviously there's been a huge shift between you know, moving to something where you're not able to, like, physically and sort of legally not able to be performing out in public. Are you like, how do you feel you're adjusting to that? Is it hard, like not being able to go out and play with people, or, you know, how have you been, you know, dealing with that?
Yeah, I do miss it quite a lot. Playing with people. I mean, right now I'm playing quote unquote remotely with people, which means that I'm recording and then they're recording their parts and we're assembling the whole thing. But it's such a different experience. It's a good experience and it taught me a lot. But there's something to say about like the intimacy of being with other players in the room and exchanging music, you know.
Yeah.
Kind of like makes the cells of your body awaken or something, you know. And so I do miss that. I do miss that quite a lot. And at the same time, I feel like, you know, like this feeling when you haven't touched your instrument somehow for a day because, I don't know, you were traveling or for whatever reason it is, and then you go back to your instrument and it's like the sound is so fresh. Like you're able to identify things you've never identified before, and you listen to the sound in such a different way. So I do feel like when I'm gonna get the chance to play live again, it's gonna be such a different experience. Like it's gonna transform my whole understanding of what playing live music is really, you know? Even like it's like this experience has definitely transformed my understanding of what it's like to be a musician, you know? And I do feel like I'm gonna be so happy to play again. It's gonna be like just, I mean, I already said it, but a new understanding of what I do. And I think it's going to allow me to dig even deeper into what I do.
Absolutely.
It's going to be so fresh, like going, not only being up on stage and you know, interacting with people, like being in the same room with everybody, but also just getting that sort of immediacy, like that feedback from the audience is just something that is like influences your playing so much, and is just something that I know me, like that's something I've missed. Like even though I haven't really necessarily, I wasn't really gigging a lot sort of at the end of my time at Berklee, but you know, it's just something that there's nothing that can really compare to that, you know. It's interesting.
I do love like feeling the reaction of people to the music, you know, like when you put music out and people let you know what they thought about it, it's always incredibly nice, but there's something to say about the immediacy, like you said, you know.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, looking at how the COVID vaccine in England is going now, it's looking like, you know, it's looking promising for that to come back, you know, sort of in the future. So that's I'm excited for that. You know, we just all need to sort of hunker down and be sure that we, you know, work through the last of this, because, you know, again, sort of going back to Tal Noor and something that we're talking about there, you know, it's the light at the end of the tunnel. It's finally emerging. So
I'm gonna put a single out soon that's called Finding the Light, that's also inspired by this whole thing we're living. So
absolutely. Listeners, keep an eye out for that. That'll be awesome. So real quick, we're sort of approaching the end of the podcast here. So I have one last big question for you. So what advice would you have for anybody, you know, regardless of age, that's looking to get into songwriting or production or arranging or playing an instrument? What would your advice for them be?
I guess to always approach it being driven and passionate. Like, to me, that's the key. If you like doing something, if you enjoy doing something, like there's still gonna be a lot of hard work put it into it, but it's almost like sometimes it's gonna feel effortless. When you love doing something so much, you can spend hours on it, and you know, like I guess keep that joy. You know, like when you're a little kid and you pick an instrument for the first time, and you just feel so joyful, right? I think approaching whatever it is really, like, you know, like a songwriting or production or whatever you want to do, with that same feeling is very powerful. You know?
Absolutely. That's incredible. Alrighty. So I want to thank Jemina so much for being a guest on this week's episode. Jemina, where can our audience find you? Like where on the internet?
I have a website, www.jeminabrechoire.com. I am not gonna lie, I'm not the most active person on social media, because I think there's more to life than, you know my views on it. It's for another conversations. But I do have an Instagram, Jemina Does Music. Yes, Jemina Does Music. She doesn't even know her own Instagram. She's like, what is it? So yeah, that's mainly the two things.
That's great.
Hey everybody, it's Adam from the future again. Sorry again about any audio issues, file transferring snafus this week. So it got a little bit choppy and the quality wasn't great. So apologies for that. I'll take this outro one more time. So again, this has been Early Reflections. I'm Adam Daniel Jones. Find us on Facebook at Early Reflections with Adam Daniel Jones. I'm on Instagram at Adam Daniel Jones, all lowercase. And remember, Early Reflections have an important role in determining the sound and character of a space. See you soon.